My name is Faranak Mirjalili and I'm a Jungian analyst and the founder of the Anima Mundi School, a place of learning and research for the feminine and the world soul. For this video, I sat down with dear friend and mentor Anne Baring. Anne is a retired Jungian analyst, a writer and researcher on the history of feminine consciousness, depth psychology and mythology. We sat down to speak about the feminine psyche, both individually and collectively, and we also sat down to discuss the challenges that we are facing in this time. We often hear these days that the time of patriarchy is over, and that if we are to survive as a human species, but also, and most importantly, as a whole Earth species, that we need to come into a better understanding and balance between the feminine and masculine principles, and that both these qualities need to be equally honored, respected, and lived. But what does this really mean when patriarchy has reigned for more than 4,000 years? How do we define the feminine? How do we know what our feminine qualities are? And what does it even mean to be a woman in a time of global climate catastrophe? Are we doing enough as women when we stand up against tyrannical political leaders? Is it enough to stand up in protest and even rebellion, to say no to that which we no longer accept? Are we doing enough to dismantle patriarchy through our outer actions? From a Jungian perspective, real change happens within. And this is for both individual and collective change. We turn towards the inner figures of our dreams and the messages the unconscious gives us to try to find and locate these old patriarchal patterns that are rooted within us, so that from that place we can dismantle, transfigure, and transform then and rebirth it into a new masculine principle that will protect and serve life. Now, this is quite difficult and arduous work. If you think of all the thousands of years of patriarchy and the programming, then harm this has done to our feminine body, soul, and mind. Jung called the masculine principle within a woman the animus. For a woman to really encounter her animus and to really work and transform him, she first needs to walk through the valley of her own shadow.
The personal shadow is that to do with our own individual lives and our own individual experience of parents, school, university, jobs, life, etc., and our relationships, all our relationships. And the more we can really remember our feelings as a child, what we were able to express or allowed to express and what we were not allowed to express, and then look at the aspects of yourself that might have been lost or hidden or buried that need to be brought back. In my own case, it was writing. I had no idea that I could write, and yet what I wanted to do was write all the time. It was a sort of strange thing of wanting to, but not knowing that one could. It's that kind of thing. So bringing the shadow back into consciousness is about becoming aware of gifts you may not know you have. So many people have dreams of being attacked by a burglar or a murderer, and of course they're terrified in the dream and they wake up, a nightmare kind of thing. But with understanding, what is that murderer? Why is he wanting to kill you? Very often they're trying to get your attention, these attacking figures. They really want to be integrated into the psyche, and you need help with that. It's very difficult to do it on your own. So what would be attacking them then would be what they're most frightened of. But I've heard many people who've had that murderer transformed into a helper and an invaluable assistant, as it were, a companion. I remember a dream early on in my analysis with a woman analyst called Hella Adler, a wonderful analyst, but the dream was that I was sitting in my bed at night with a golden pen in my hand, with a piece of paper on my lap, so to speak. And then I became aware that behind me there was a murderer with a knife in his hand, creeping up, about to stab me in the back, at which point, naturally, I woke up. And many long months and years of work transformed that murderer into a very helpful Animus figure, if you like, who helped me to write my books. So that was a transformation, the dream I had at the beginning when I had no idea that I could write. And then gradually that murderer became, or would-be murderer, and the golden pen began to write. And the gold being an alchemical image of the true value, of the supreme value, if you like. So that is one example, but there are many, many dreams, and many dreams that women have of being attacked. And they may take it too literally rather than take it symbolically. What is murdering me in my own psyche? What is the critical voice which is saying, whatever you do is no good, you're rubbish, don't pay attention to that because it's no good, leave all that behind. Whatever the voice is saying, women and men, because it could be the anima aspect of man speaking negatively, they need to write down what that voice is saying. That's terribly important. And they'll be amazed what they write down. Maybe not more than a few sentences, but it may be a sentence that repeated over and over again since they were a child. I'm no good, I'm not as good as him or her, my brother's better than I am. Whatever it might be, my father doesn't love me, therefore I'm no good. Get the voice down onto paper.
According to Carl Jung, when we turn towards the inner figure of our dreams, we don't only encounter material that belongs to us individually on a personal level, but we can actually encounter what he called more collective layers of the psyche. Now this can be anything from family, ancestral, cultural, or even the archaic memory of humanity. In the following dream, we will hear an example of where the dreamer encounters the animus not only on a personal but also on a collective level.
In this dream, I'm walking down a slanted car park towards an empty prison cell. When I open one of the barrack doors, I find all these young dead men inside. They're lying on the floor and they're covered in a little bit of water. I close the door again, and when I look back to the car park, also inside all of the cars are dead men now. And they've turned blue because they've been dead for a while. And when I look to my left, behind the fence, there's a black man coming towards me, and he's able to get through the gate, and I'm absolutely petrified because I know that if he will get to me, he will rape and he will kill me. So I start to run towards this playground carousel, and he runs after me, and we just go round and round this carousel, and in my fear I start to plead with him, and I ask him, please stop, because if you continue, the abuse will also just continue. And as I say this, I can see his story, and he's had exactly the same thing happening to him. And when I see that, I also see that he starts crying. He just bursts out into tears, and he collapses on the floor on the other side of the carousel. And both of us are slumped down, absolutely devastated. And I wake up.
This dream, I think, is very interesting because it really shows the collective situation of men in our culture, and men as they've had to live their lives for thousands of years as warriors. They have no choice. They're sent to war really as sacrificial victims at the order of governments who've entered into this war, and then they act their part, as it were, as warriors. Some may be killed and some may not be killed, but they have no real choice once they've decided to be soldiers. They have no choice. They have to obey orders after that. And they're enormously brave and enormously, I don't know what the word is, one can feel the greatest sympathy for what their fate has been for thousands of years, in which they didn't have a voice, really. And in a way, this dream is giving them a voice because it's showing them that they've been drowned in the waters of the unconscious. They've been, as it were, buried or forgotten. Their feelings have not been valued. They have not been given the attention that they need. And then the next part of the dream, where the man comes against you, as it were, and you sense him coming to rape you and murder you, that is the natural reaction to woman by men who've been traumatized by having their feelings completely neglected for thousands of years. So woman is the enemy, but woman is the projection of the unconscious feminine aspect of their own nature, their own deepest feelings that have never been honored or listened to. They couldn't speak about them to anyone because to speak about them would have shamed them as a warrior. So therefore they come to rape and murder the woman in the dream. But at the last minute, something happens. They're able to experience their feeling for the first time, and they burst into tears. And then you both burst into tears, and there's no question of rape or murder anymore, because really you're embracing each other as brother and sister. That's incredibly moving. I have tears myself. Because man's voice has never been listened to any more than woman's. Only the voice of those in power have been listened to. And this has to change. I think we do influence the field, the whole field of humanity, when we're doing something at this very deep level. And when a dream like that comes up and there's a resolution to it, that resolution goes into the collective field, if you like, as a positive input. And what science has discovered recently is that we are all connected. The whole universe is connected. So what we do in our individual lives and even in our individual dreams matters, because what we're doing with this work is creating a bridge between the conscious and the unconscious, or between the conscious mind and the deeper soul. So this is something infinitely valuable. It's terribly important. It's like being able to cross or build a real bridge in the physical world, but we're building a bridge in the psychic dimension. Animus was the word that Jung gave to the masculine aspect of a woman's psyche, just like he gave the aspect, the feminine aspect of a man's psyche, gave the name of the anima, just two different Latin words with different endings. But the animus really, looking back over the whole history of Western civilization, or Eastern civilization for that matter, the animus has been the controlling element in the way, keeping the feminine value down or keeping it silent. And now it's changing. The whole relationship in a woman's psyche with the masculine aspect of her nature is changing, because she needs that masculine help to get her into the world, to get her able to manifest whatever creative gift she has, because he's a facilitator coming from the unconscious. He's like a psychopomp in a way. He's guiding her into society, helping her, or this is what he should be doing, helping her express her great gifts and also express her values, which have not been listened to. All the values that she's held through being a mother and a woman for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, caring for the life of children, carrying children, those values are the ones which protect and serve life. And she is the great carrier of those values. It's very important for a woman to be in a good relationship with her animus and to know that it exists, because there can be a danger of animus possession in women, particularly today, because in finding their voice, they may, in fact, that they are educated as men, brought up with the same teaching in schools and everything, and they may actually speak with a male voice rather than a female voice. And they may be so taken over by the need for power that they actually fall into the grip of the masculine aspect of their nature in a rather unpleasant way, because it then takes over and it speaks, as it were, through their voice, but in a very didactic and dominant kind of way. Suddenly, she's found her voice and she comes at them like a battering ram, and they run a mile because they don't know how to handle this new woman. So both men and women need to know that a new woman is coming up, but it will need quite a few years of practicing how to be a woman and in touch with the male aspect without being taken over or possessed by it. So it just needs to be balanced. I think there's too much emphasis on the yang aspect of life and too little aspect on the yin, which is the containing. It's terribly important that woman realizes that she is a container of a whole family, of the husband or partner as well as the children, and also in a social sense that there's a containing factor in the culture which can hold the balance between this tremendous masculine drive in both men and women, because you see it in the masculine drive in, say, what's his name, Zuckerberg and Facebook. And that whole scenario is driven by the male psyche, absolutely wanting to go further and further and further, taking everything with them without a thought of what they're leaving behind. A double whammy. Well, what is the negative animus is the voice that acts destructively in your life and tells you you're no good, and that you have to do this, that and the other in order to be acceptable. You have to dress in a certain way, you have to behave in a certain way, you have to speak in a certain way. And that can be the voice which is driving women to achieve more and more, and only achievement matters. Relationships don't matter. So if the animus is saying you're no good unless you're top of the rung in banking or politics, or unless you're speaking at the United Nations or whatever it might be, you haven't achieved your life goal and you're no good. And it will neglect the whole field of relationships. That is one of the characteristics of the negative animus. He's not interested in relationships at all. So if your partner is suffering from you being nasty to him, that won't matter in relation to your achieving your goal. Absolutely, because women have had to obey for 4,000 years. They've had to obey the voice of the church, and now they have to obey whatever the cultural norm is on how they should behave. They're not really free until they're really happy to be who they are, and have no sense that they have to be more in order to be acceptable. The animus in the inner world, who may be very negative to begin with, owing to the woman's formation and programming, can turn into her best friend, an ally, and her guide, really, into the deeper regions of the unconscious, the deeper regions of the soul. And if you think back into mythology, for instance, in the myth of Demeter and Persephone, how Hermes was the messenger sent by the gods, so to speak, to bring Persephone out of the underworld. And she was able to come out after she'd eaten 6 seeds of the pomegranate, which meant that she had to return for 6 months to the underworld, 6 months in the upper world. But that's a wonderful image of Hermes as psychopomp, or guide, and messenger between the dimensions, between this world and the other world, or this world and the deeper world of the psyche. And woman needs to know about that she has this messenger within her. She has this deep guide. In the worldly sense, the function of the animus is to manifest woman's creativity, to give her a channel or a possibility of manifesting in some way.
The instinct and the connection to the animal body and soul is an essential part of feminine power. And it is exactly this relationship that patriarchy has severed over the past thousands of years. It is in the instinct that we find our connection to the earth that can not only help heal, nourish, and sustain us, but also the larger ecology of which we are part. Through being rooted in her instinctual wisdom, women can stand up and say no to that which harms life. They can stand up against the tyranny of the negative animus within, or the outer patriarchy for that matter. Through reclaiming and healing her connection to her instinctual self, women can also reclaim their inherent stewardship and guardianship of the natural world. In the following dream, we will see an example of how this initial severance can be imaged in a dream.
It was in the middle of a forest. It was at an open space. It was very desolate. And all of a sudden, I got a shock because I saw a tiger on a guillotine. And I knew that it was put there by a human, a male energy, but I couldn't see him. But I felt it was really cruel and ruthless. And I felt compassion for the tiger. I felt sorry for him. And I wanted to free the tiger, but I didn't know how. So that's why I felt so helpless. So in the end of the dream, I wanted to flee away because the atmosphere was so haunting. But at the other side, I didn't want to leave the tiger because I had a strong connection with it. And then I woke up.
It shows what's been happening to the instinct, that it, so to speak, had its head cut off. And this could apply to the whole culture, everyone in it, because pretty well everyone is unconsciously driven by the instinct because we've, so to speak, cut off the head of the instinct. We pay no attention to it. We don't know anything about it. And so it takes possession of us in the form of anger, rage, greed, whatever it might be, aggression towards other people, which are enacted in all the conflicts in the world. Because the instinct then is out of control. It's gone back to its most primitive way of behaving, much worse than the animals. Most important with that dream is what has that woman allowed to be done to her own instinct? What has she, as it were, decapitated in herself, which is her creative life impulse? I remember a dream that I had, that a woman brought an analysis about a snake being hung on a hook, and it was dying. And I said to her, "What have you killed in yourself? This is a reptilian brain in yourself. What have you done to it? Why is it in this state?" And it came out that she'd been in an unhappy marriage for many, many years, and she couldn't stand it anymore. She was dying because she had no will to live, because her instinct was crucified. One has to really look at the whole position of the instinct and how it was treated right the way through all these three patriarchal cultures. That the body was cut off, which means that the instincts were cut off. They were looked down upon as something inferior, something threatening to the spiritual aspirations of man. And therefore they were persecuted. And we've gone, that is reflected in our persecution of animals, the way we use animals for experiment, for drugs, for developing drugs for our use. Don't think about the suffering of the animals. They're sacrificed to our needs. That's one aspect. Secondly, there's the way we treat matter in the whole atomic energy scenario, where we split matter in 1945 in order to develop the atomic weapon that now threatens all of us. What we have persecuted threatens us with destruction. And this is something terribly important to know and realize, that we cannot treat matter the way we do, or the body the way we do, or life the way we do, without there being really, really serious repercussions, which are coming at us now in the form of climate change. But that decapitated tiger, which is the most magnificent animal in the jungle and the most powerful, he can't be powerful anymore. He can no longer walk through his jungle. He is unable to protect himself. And that is all the fault of our religious beliefs, firstly, and our scientific beliefs, that it doesn't matter what we do to matter. I think that sums it up.